Now in this next lesson, let's talk about the box shadow property. The box shadow property will be attaching one or more shadows to an element. Let's try to create a new file here and then name it boxshadow.html. Now let's go and create a new HTML5 file here. Let's go give it a title of box shadow property. By now, I'm really sure that you're already familiar on how to create and maximize the use of Visual Studio Code and how we can go and create boxes inside of Visual Studio Code. So let's go and put an H1 here. Box shadow exercise. Let's go give it a background color of yellow. Let's go open our document here. Let me just go and resize this. Let's go and give it a height of 50 VH. Now let's go give this a modifier 1 and 2. Now let's put some text inside of our div here. P element, this has higher elevation. Now let's go add some text inside of our second div here. This has lower elevation. Now let's go and select our box 1. Let's have a background color of white. Now let's go and copy paste that. Let's go give this a 2 value and give it a height of 100 pixels and width of 100 pixels. Let's go check what this looks like now. Okay, let's just go and copy paste this inside of our box 2. Now let's go give them a general class for box. So let's go and do that here. Now let's go and text align this center and of course select the box. Then let's go and give the box here display inline block. Refresh. Let's try to give it a little bit of margin here. Let's say 20 pixels. Now let's try to go and give it a box shadow. So for box 1, let's give it a box shadow property of 10 pixels and 10 pixels. Let's see what will happen. We can see here that we gave it two values of 10 pixels and 10 pixels, and that was able to give us a stylized shadow of solid black. Now if we go down here and also give this box 2 of 5 pixels, let's see what will happen. We can see here that the boxes that we have here is now not just sitting on the background, and it is giving us a little bit of elevation. The box shadow property that we have here can really help us give an effect on how far off our objects or elements can be from the background. Just remember that we can use other CSS units here besides from, let's say here, pixels, but we cannot use percentage. So let's say I give it 10% and 10%. Percentage, just so you know, will not be working for this box shadow property. For the values that we gave here, for the first value, that will be the horizontal offset, and for the second value, that will be the vertical offset. So if we go and give this 0 pixels for the vertical offset, you will see that the box shadow is only moving from the left or horizontally. Now if we try to make the horizontal offset 0, you would see that the box shadow is moving from the top going to the bottom vertically. The box shadow property can have different property values. So we can have the following box shadow property here. So let me just copy paste that here for your reference. We can see here the blur, the spread, and the specific color that you would want to go and apply for the box shadow. Just remember that in Safari, the color parameter is required, because if you do not specify the color, the shadow is not displayed at all. For the other browsers, the default value is the text color. Some other keynotes here will be that we can also specify negative values for the horizontal and vertical offsets. You would see here that our horizontal offset was moved negative 10 pixels going to the left side of our box element here. Now if we go and give this a value of 0 and this one negative 10, you would see that it will move up in our browser. If we go and give this a much bigger value, you would see that the box shadow will be moving farther away to the top from our main element here. Now the third value that we can actually give here in our box shadow property will be the blur radius. Let's give it a 10 pixels. Just remember that the higher the value of the number that you give here, it will be making our shadow more blurry, or the higher the number, the more blurred our shadow will be. So let's give it a 50 pixels here. Let's see what will happen. So we can see here that we can make the color softer depending on the value you want to specify. It will go from solid color, let's say here solid 10 pixels black, then it gradually declined its opacity. Some keynotes to remember when using the blur value here: we cannot give it a value of negative because this will not be working. So the default value for this will be 0 pixels or 0, and any positive number will work. Let's give it a 10 pixels here. Now for the fourth property value, we have the spread. So let's try to give it a 10 pixels of spread value. Let's see what will happen. This just simply means that we are taking 10 pixels from here, and that's when we start our blur. Now just to show you here, let me just go and try to remove the vertical and the horizontal and the vertical offset. Now let me just go and try to remove the spread first here. Let's see what it will look like. Our blur with 10 pixels. So we can see that the blur is near our elements here with 10 pixels. And once we include the spread value, it increases the solid black, then applies the blur effect. We can see that's pretty much making our blur further away from the sides of the element and making the blur look much bigger. It's pushing the blur 10 pixels in all directions. Just remember that the spread radius with a positive value will increase the size of the shadow, and the negative value will decrease the size of the shadow. So let's give it a negative value here. We can see here that the negative 10 pixels here decrease the size of our shadow. That's why it's missing here and it's not being shown here on our screen. Now if we give it a higher value, let's say 100 pixels, let's see what will happen. You would see that our shadow grew bigger, and then it added the 10 pixels of blur on the sides. For the next property, we can now set our color. We can see here that the color is black for the box shadow, but that is not the default value for the box shadow. Just remember that the default color for the box shadow will be the text color. Default color is the text color property. Some keynote to remember here is that we should not be relying on this, because some browsers such as Safari, for example, will be having its default value of the color for the box shadow to transparent. So if we do not use the color parameter, you will not be able to specify the color and the shadow is not displayed at all. So let's go and refresh this and we can see that we have the box shadow here. If we try to go and specify the color of the text for our box here, let's say red, you would see that it will be inherited by the box shadow. Now if we go and use the color parameter, let's say I would want to turn it into pink. So now we are changing the color of the box shadow and it's different from the color of our element, the color property of our element. Another keyword that you can maximize and use here is the current color keyword. So you will see that once we save this, it will be inheriting the color of the text color property. We can also use other values here for the color. We can use the RGB value and we can specify here the color 000, then 0.5 for the opacity. Let's see what will happen. Now you can see here that we have a color black with an opacity of 0.5. So just remember we can also use hex color code here for specifying the back shadow of your elements. Another parameter value here is the inset, and if we try to go and apply that, you would see that the value inset will be changing the shadow from the outer shadow or outset to an inner shadow. The only required properties here will be the back shadow for the horizontal and vertical offset. Just remember that you cannot skip the blur and then put the spread value. So if I go give this a 20 pixels, that will be a blur effect, not the spread effect. If I go and try to give an inset value here in front, you would see that this will still work and the order will not matter. We can also specify multiple box shadow. So let me just go and remove the inset value here. Let's save that and then add a comma and let's give a value of 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and black. So here I want to go and change the color here to red so that we can distinguish the first box shadow and the second box shadow, which will have a color of black. So you can see here that we don't have a spread here. We can actually go and give that value here and let's see what will happen. You would see that it became a bigger red, and we have, if we change the spread here to 20 pixels, just a keynote to remember here that the first declaration of code that we've made will be always on top of the other declarations that we have here. So those will be layers of box shadows. So if we play around with this, let's just have a line break here for us to be able to easily identify the different box shadows. So this will be more focused on the cascade values that we have delivered here, so you don't have to worry about the line breaks. Just remember we can separate each of the box shadows by giving it a comma here. Let me just go and increase the horizontal offset of the black color here. And then let's have a different color for the third box that we have here. Now what I want to do here for the third box would be to have a negative 10 pixels, and this one will be for the vertical offset will be 30 pixels. And then let's go and have another line of code for another box shadow. Let's give it a value of blue. Let's save that and let's try to refresh. We can see here that these are layers of colors from red, black, green, and blue. And let's just go and make this 30 pixels, 40 pixels, 40 pixels. Let's see what will it look like. So some keynotes to remember here is that the blur can be used to really make the effect of making an element elevated over other elements. And when using box shadows, it's good to take note of the direction of the light source using the offset values. And we also have to keep in mind to avoid having the opposite offset values because it can make the direction of the light confusing. Now that we are done with this, I just want to go back to our index.html here and then try to go and apply some box shadows in our header nav container. So at least we can apply what we have learned here. So we have a box shadow of 0, 0 for the offset and 10 pixels for the blur radius, and I want to give it an RGBA of 0, 0, 0, 0.6. Now let's save this. Now let me just go and open our document here. Let's see what will happen in our document and check the box shadow. So we now have a bit of box shadow at the back of our navigation here.